what these planetary alignments, especially this new moon in Aquarius, might mean, not just for the world, but, for you listening right now.
I think what stood out to me right away reading this was how much the source material stresses this feeling that time is speeding up, like things are happening faster and faster. Is that something you see often in forecasts? Or is this a...
I mean, it's definitely a recurring theme,
Yeah.
but the source is really emphasizing it. And I think a lot of people are feeling it too, just in their daily lives. This sense of urgency, almost like,
Yeah, like you can barely catch your breath. Is it all the technology maybe?
yeah,
Always connected, always on the go?
it's certainly a factor, but the source goes deeper, connecting it to this shift away from linear time. It's kind of a mind-bending concept.
Okay, yeah, explain that one. Because I got to admit, the whole linear time thing, I'm not totally getting it.
Well, think of it this way. We're used to experiencing time as a straight line, past, present, future, right?
Mm.
But what if it's not really like that? What if time is actually more like, I don't know, a web or a spiral with multiple paths and possibilities all happening at once?
Okay, I can kind of see that, and that's, whoa. That's a lot to take in, and it does feel kind of overwhelming, if I'm being honest.
It can be. As we adjust to this shift, it's a lot of energy to process. The source actually gives some good advice on dealing with this, though, with the intensity of it all.
Oh yeah, what's that? I'm all ears.
Just simple things, really. The spending time in nature, really grounding,
Mhm.
or breath work, even just lighting a candle, focusing on that flame, quieting the mind. Those can all help.
Practical stuff, love it.
Yeah.
I'm actually a big fan of candles anyway, so...
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Now, moving on, let's talk about Mars, because Mars is definitely a major player in this forecast. It's in a really strong position right now, closer to Earth, and the source uses these words hot and ardent to describe it.
Mars. Okay, now that gets my attention. So for anyone listening who maybe isn't super familiar with astrology, Mars is all about action, energy, getting things done right.
Exactly. It's that assertive, driven energy. But when Mars is amped up like this, well, there's also the potential for conflict, for aggression, arguments even. Important to be mindful of that. Find healthy ways to channel all that Martian energy.
Right, right. Interesting timing, too, because didn't you say there was a major earthquake in Japan, like the day this forecast was recorded?
Yeah, just a few hours before, actually. And that's not a coincidence, at least astrologically speaking.
Yeah.
Because Mars, traditionally, it's associated with seismic activity, all that raw energy literally shaking things up.
Wow. Okay, so we got to watch out for earthquakes, maybe. But also, I guess this heightened Mars energy could be showing up in other ways, too, right? In our own lives, and maybe on a global scale.
For sure. And the source even calls out a possible connection between Mars and the U.S. Mercury, particularly focused around January 20th, Inauguration Day, of course.
Oh, right. That's huge. What's the source saying about that?
Basically, there's this potential for angry words, disagreements, even outright conflict, especially in areas related to foreign relations or legal matters. But got to be clear here, this is all from an astrological perspective.
Of course, of course. We're not making any political predictions, just looking at potential themes and energies here.
Right, exactly. Now, since we're on the topic of big events, Inauguration Day itself, astrologically speaking, it's pretty wild. At noon on January 20th, there's going to be this incredibly tight conjunction between the Sun and Pluto, both in Aquarius.
So for those of us who aren't fluent in astrology speak, what does that actually mean?
Okay, so the Sun, that represents our ego, our life force, basically our core self. Pluto, on the other hand, that's the planet of transformation, deep change, power dynamics. And a conjunction, that means they're basically right next to each other, amplifying each other's energy. All this happening in Aquarius, the sign of innovation, technology, revolution.
Sounds like a recipe for some serious upheaval. Like a lot of energy focused on power, change, maybe even some shakeups.
That's one way to look at it for sure. Could also indicate some massive advancements in technology, maybe a shift in power, who knows?
Yeah, a lot to think about there. So we've got Mars, we've got Pluto, lots of intense energy swirling around. But then the forecast also mentions this new moon in Aquarius happening on January 29th. And that's described as having a totally different vibe.
Yeah, much lighter, more transparent, kind of a breath of fresh air after all that heavy full moon energy we just went through. New moons are always about new beginnings, setting intentions. And this one, especially with it being in Aquarius, it really feels like a clean slate, a chance for new possibilities.
Okay, I like where this is going. Tell me more about this Aquarian energy, because the forecast mentions some pretty interesting stuff, new social developments, even censorship-free internet platforms. Like, whoa.
Right. It's exciting to think about. Aquarius is all about truth, awakening, community, innovation. So this new moon could really bring a surge of energy around those themes. And that idea of a more decentralized, transparent online world, it's very Aquarian, breaking down those old systems.
Can't wait to see how that plays out. But there's another layer to this whole new era thing that I found fascinating. The source talks a lot about dwarf planets, and that's not something you hear every day in astrology.
It's true. Dwarf planets, they're relatively new to modern astrology, but they're becoming more and more important as we move into this new era. The source specifically points to Makemake, Haumea, and Quaoar.
And these dwarf planets, they sound pretty amazing, like Makemake, connected to the cultural revival of Easter Island. And Quaoar, creating order from chaos. I mean, just the names themselves.
They're powerful, right? And they really embody this ancient wisdom, resilience, this ability to rebuild and thrive even after destruction, like whispers from the past guiding us forward.
Okay, gotta ask, how do these dwarf planets actually affect us personally? Because they sound pretty powerful.
It's a good question. It's less about direct personal effects and more about these dwarf planets representing these big collective shifts in consciousness, almost like they're reminding us of this ancient wisdom we carry within us.
So it's like they're offering us a map, a way to navigate these big changes that are happening.
That's a good way to put it. And that brings us to another key part of this forecast, the North Node in Pisces. Because the source connects this placement very strongly to the theme of unconditional love.
Okay, so we've got new beginnings, truth, awakening, now unconditional love. It's definitely starting to feel like a whole new paradigm emerging.
It's powerful. And this theme of unconditional love, it's made even stronger by the conjunction of Venus and Neptune that's also happening around this time. Venus is love, harmony, and Neptune is spirituality, transcendence. So together, they create this incredible energy for unconditional love, compassion.
Okay, so with all this intensity, all this potential for upheaval we've talked about, this unconditional love thing, it's almost like a beacon of hope, right? Like a guiding light.
Exactly. It's that reminder that even amidst chaos and change, love is that guiding force, the energy that heals, that connects us all.
This is why I love these deep dives, honestly. So much to unpack, and we're just getting started. But before we jump into part two, there's one more planet we got to talk about. Uranus, the planet of awakening and disruption, because that seems pretty important too.
Ah, yes, Uranus. This is the planet of sudden change, unexpected events, big breakthroughs in consciousness. It shakes things up, pushes us out of our comfort zones.
It's a little scary, to be honest, but also exciting, maybe.
It's both, for sure. Uranus is like that cosmic innovator, comes along and says, hey, we've always done things this way, but guess what? We're doing them differently now.
Makes you wonder what's going to happen next, right?
Ah.
And speaking of shaking things up, I remember the source had a very specific recommendation for listeners, that documentary series, the Telepathy Tapes.
Oh, yes, the Telepathy Tapes. Really fascinating. It's all about the extraordinary abilities of autistic individuals and how they challenge our understanding of consciousness, of human potential, really.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm intrigued. What are these telepathy tapes all about? Like, what's the main idea?
It dives into this idea that these individuals, many of them nonverbal, they're actually operating on this genius level, tapping into abilities that, well, most of us either don't have or have totally forgotten about.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like something everyone should watch. A must-see.
The source describes it as mind-blowing, and it really fits with this whole Aquarian shift in consciousness we've been talking about, breaking down those barriers,
Yeah.
embracing different ways of being.
I'm officially adding it to my watch list. But before we all go rushing off to find the telepathy tapes, let's do a quick recap, just to remind everyone what we've covered so far in this forecast.
All right, so we've got this feeling of accelerated time, right? The potential for big upheavals, but also big breakthroughs, these themes of truth and awakening, and this powerful call to embrace a new, more conscious way of being. Oh, and we can't forget those dwarf planets. All that ancient wisdom and regenerative power.
Yeah, a lot to process. Definitely an intense mix of energies, that's for sure. But hey, keeps things interesting. And we'll be back soon to dive even deeper into the telepathy tapes and what it all means for this whole Aquarian era thing. Stay tuned.
Absolutely, lots more to explore.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about the telepathy tapes and how it challenges our whole understanding of consciousness.
Yeah, definitely. The documentary, it really focuses on the unique abilities of autistic individuals, a lot of whom are nonverbal. And the suggestion is, that these individuals, they're operating on this genius level almost. The source actually uses the term savants, like those people with these incredible, extraordinary skills in specific areas, but often alongside, developmental differences.
Right, right. So they're saying these savants, they're tapping into a different level of awareness, something most of us just aren't even tuned into.
It's a radical shift, for sure, because for so long, society has labeled these individuals, disabled or limited. But the telepathy tapes, it turns that whole idea on its head. Like, what if there are differences? What if those are actually strengths? Abilities that, I don't know, maybe we've lost touch with, or maybe we haven't even developed yet as a species.
Instead of limitations, it's like their
Yeah.
differences are actually pointing us towards a greater understanding of what human potential really is.
Exactly. And it really ties back to those Aquarian themes, challenging the status quo, embracing new ways of thinking. It's all connected.
You mentioned the source talks about this global telepathic network among these individuals. Okay, now that sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does, right. And it's one of the most mind-blowing parts of the documentary, honestly. The idea that these individuals are communicating on a level that goes beyond, I don't know, language even,
Yeah.
beyond physical distance. It's wild.
So are they literally communicating through thought, like telepathy? Is that what they're saying?
Basically, yeah. They're bypassing all their usual ways of communicating and connecting on this much deeper level. The source describes it as a kind of higher mind or a collective consciousness. It's hard to even wrap your head around.
I can imagine. Makes you wonder, though, could this be like a glimpse into the future of communication? Like, what if one day we're all connected in ways we can't even imagine right now?
It's a real possibility. Exciting, but also, I don't know, maybe a little scary. And it definitely speaks to that Aquarian theme of community, of interconnectedness, all that.
For sure. And the source seems to be suggesting that these autistic individuals, these savants, they're not just, part of this Aquarian shift. They're actually leading the way. Like they're the
Yeah.
pioneers.
It's like they're holding up this mirror, to the rest of humanity, showing us a different way of seeing the world, of being in the world.
Okay, that's pretty profound
Uh-huh.
when you think about it. The telepathy tapes. Officially got to watch it now.
You won't be disappointed. Seriously, it'll make you think. And speaking of things that make you think, there's this other thread in the forecast we haven't really touched on yet. All that stuff about ancient wisdom and the reemergence of, shamanic practices is really interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I was wondering when we'd get to that. Because the source definitely makes these connections between the dwarf planets and ancient wisdom, right? Like Make, and the whole cultural revival of Easter Island. And Quiwar as this force that brings order out of chaos.
Right, right. And that whole concept of creating order out of chaos, that's very much in line with a lot of shamanic traditions, if you think about it.
So it's not just about embracing the new, but also recognizing and honoring the wisdom of the past. It's almost like we're rediscovering this ancient knowledge, these practices that maybe got lost or forgotten along the way.
Exactly. And it makes sense, right? So many indigenous cultures, they've always had these beliefs about interconnectedness, about telepathy, about multiple dimensions of reality, all these things that, modern science is just starting to catch up with.
It's like we're coming full circle, in a way,
Mm.
bringing together the wisdom of the past with all these new innovations.
And that ties into the larger theme of awakening. It's not just technological, it's not just intellectual, it's spiritual too. It's like remembering who we really are, where we fit into the universe.
It's like tapping into a wisdom that goes way beyond just our rational minds, embracing a more holistic view, right?
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, this reemergence of all these shamanic practices, it's a sign that we're ready to tap into that deeper wisdom. Connect with the earth, connect with our ancestors, connect with those mysteries of existence.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. I love these deep dives. It's like a crash course in the future of humanity.
Right, we're talking about technology, consciousness, ancient wisdom, community, unconditional love, all these things coming together. It's a lot.
It is. But it's important to remember, that with all these intense energies swirling around, we're not just passive observers in all this. We have a choice, right?
Yeah.
In how we respond, how we participate.
Absolutely. We're all co-creators in this unfolding story. We get to choose how the next chapter unfolds.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, huh? Dwarf planets, telepathic networks, ancient wisdom. It's a lot. But before we wrap things up, we got to circle back to that Mars energy, because the forecast definitely emphasized that, and we haven't really talked about how that might play out in our everyday lives.
You're right, we haven't. And it's important. Because Mars, remember, it's action, drive, passion, all that good stuff. But it's also conflict, aggression. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, for sure. So how do we work with that? How do we use that Martian energy constructively? Especially with the source talking about, possible conflicts, especially around Inauguration Day.
It's all about finding healthy outlets, I think. Think of physical activity, getting that energy out, creative expression, even passionate debate, as long as it's respectful. The key is not letting that energy turn inward, fester, become destructive.
Okay, so channel that Mars energy into building something up rather than tearing things down. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, how does all this tie into the unconditional love thing? Because that seems so central to this new era, and it kind of feels like the opposite of all that Mars intensity.
It's an interesting paradox, isn't it? We've got this really strong push for action, change, all that Martian stuff. And at the same time, this call for unconditional love, compassion, but maybe they're not as contradictory as they seem at first.
Okay, I'm listening.
What if unconditional love isn't about being passive or avoiding conflict altogether? What if it's about approaching those challenges, those disagreements, with a different mindset, with an open heart?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's not about backing down from what you believe in, but maybe it's about how you approach those conversations, those conflicts, with more compassion, more understanding.
That's it. And remember, the source specifically connected unconditional love with the North Node in Pisces. And the North Node, astrologically speaking, that represents our evolutionary path, the direction we're meant to be growing towards.
So maybe this is like an invitation to integrate those seemingly opposite energies, to be warriors and lovers, to fight for what we believe in, but do it with an open heart.
That's beautiful, a warrior of love, fighting for a better future, but with that heart-centered approach.
I love that. So we've explored all these complex themes, these energies. It's been a wild ride, but what does it all mean, practically speaking, for our listeners? Like, how do they take all this information and actually use it to create positive change in their own lives?
Yeah, good question. It's definitely a lot to digest. But it's important to remember the future isn't something that just happens to us, right? We all have a role to play. We get to choose how we participate in this unfolding story. And this forecast, what it shows us is that there's this potential for incredible transformation, amazing growth. But it's up to each of us to decide how we want to show up, how we want to contribute.
Powerful stuff. So what are some concrete steps then? What can people actually do to harness these Aquarian energies and create the future they want to see?
I think it starts with awareness. Pay attention to that feeling of time speeding up and find ways to ground yourself, like we talked about. Explore your creativity, find healthy ways to express your passions, and most importantly, cultivate that compassion, that understanding, even when things get tough, even when you disagree with someone.
Great advice. It's been an incredible deep dive, and I hope everyone listening feels inspired, to really embrace the possibilities of this new era. Any final words of wisdom before we sign off?
Keep your heart open, keep your mind curious, and be courageous. Because the future, it's not set in stone. We get to write it together.
Beautifully said. That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the power to create a brighter future, it's within each and every one of you. So go out there and make it happen.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Mystic Podcast Cruise. If you enjoyed today's story, give this video a thumbs up and share it with others who love uncovering life's mysteries. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Your support helps us continue bringing you captivating stories about the unknown, the mystical, and the extraordinary. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep cruising through the mysteries of life with us here on Mystic Podcast Cruise.